the law firms are starting to recognize that the entire world has shifted to this data-driven model, including them. And that's what I think is changing things for us and gives us a huge opportunity to take over this niche that exists, which that niche is the PI arena, where you get paid significantly more, and you also are helping more people. A little background on myself. Hold on a second here. So I was with the space program. I was at NASA Ames Research Center. I was studying muscle fatigue in pilots flying a simulation. And fun project. It did lead to a change in the design of the device used. We were trying to take a helicopter cockpit and fit. Currently, as you know, when you fly a helicopter, you've got 4 limbs going. It's very difficult on the body. So we're trying to integrate the F-16 single hand controller into the cockpit, and that involved doing these studies, and we found this one controller led to a lot of muscle fatigue. I quantified that using Surface EMG at a time when it was in its infancy. And then at 27 years old, I was awarded a $500,000 grant. There was 2 parts to it, but $450,000 plus $50 from the National Institutes of Health to develop the MyoVision technology. And from that, I actually met a chiropractor who said, hey, I think this could be really valuable for chiropractors. He was a doctor in Medford, Oregon, and I flew to his office, tested his patients all day, was amazed to see how the muscle tension patterns matched exactly the complaints, except for one. And I said, I don't know, I'm confused by this one. The muscle tension patterns here, we don't match at all what you told me about this patient. And he said, well, I'm glad to see that, because I threw that in just to throw you off to see if this device was actually working or if you were making up the data. And so that led to this growing. All the different states, including Washington, Michigan, Ohio, et cetera, where they decided the training was required before you could utilize it. Every one of these states endorsed my course on the Surface EMG, which, and also up in Canada, which everyone's shocked by, the CMCC even endorsed my course for all of Canada. I was on the panel of experts on the Surface EMG by the FCER, and that was interesting because it was set up so that they would basically spank all the manufacturers who were making false claims about Surface EMG in the early 90s, and it led to different schools, including CMCC, integrating the MyoVision into it. I was the only one to actually show up at this as a manufacturer. No one else appeared, and I was able to present the scientific literature to support what we were doing with this back in the early 90s, which was really did a good job of setting things up for us now. The other thing is that in Florida, I established the Validity of the tool, and it's the largest court victory since the Wolves case. And the only reason you don't know about it, believe it or not, is the Florida Chiropractic Association testified against the chiropractic profession. I'll discuss this a little bit later, but it was myself as the only expert witness against all the insurance companies in the United States and the state of Florida, and I won the validity. There's a statute in Florida now because of this. I hold multiple patents worldwide. And so one of the questions is, when I thought about this morning, I was thinking, we've spent, if you think about the cost of education for a DC, a chiropractor, you spent already, let's say, $100,000 to $150,000 on your education. And I was thinking, why wouldn't someone spend $5,000 more to actually get the tools needed to get the respect of other healthcare providers and attorneys? And for just a small amount more, to actually win that respect is where we stand right now. And this is tied to the ADA tax credit, et cetera. We'll discuss that later. But you paid a lot of money to go to school, and one of the issues we have right now is one of just simply being able to prove what we do. And would you want to see attorneys truly referring to you as their first choice? If you'd want to see that happen, I mean, we're not seeing that now. There's a reason for it, though, but we can change it. That's the key. We can change that reason. We can change the whole process. I mean, look at what a PI case is worth. We have a chiropractor in Alaska who's 72. He said his whole machine was paid for with one PI case that paid in full because he said he's never seen that happen before. And that's what happens when you utilize this stuff. The other thing that's really important is you can reach more and help more patients if you work in this arena, because there's 77,000 accidents a year, soft tissue cases a year, And these people, you know, we've had a lot of docs that are really want to avoid the PI arena. They think of it as being dirty or unethical. Well, the truth is you can actually do it in an ethical manner as long as you're following some ethical processes. And by using data properly, you don't have to fall into that trap of working in the PI arena in an unethical manner or paying off attorneys, you know, taking them to dinner or lunch, all that stuff. It's all nonsense. That's all the 80s. It's over with. The other thing, though, that to me, what drove me to develop the MyoVision for you was so that you can dictate to healthcare insurers how care should be approached. Now, what's been happening these days is everyone, except for the chiropractic arena, where the last ones left here, has fallen prey and is doing exactly what insurers want them to do. Every MD's fallen into it. PTs have. You have that freedom right now to take control over this, and in a situation where there's no way they can actually win. And the reason has to do with the cases that I've taken on personally and have established precedents in the courtroom on your behalf, which that's paved the way. It's greased the path for your ability to take over this arena, truly take it over and own that niche. Nobody else wants it. PTs don't want to measure anything. They want to just treat. MDs aren't interested in touching the patients. The real experts in soft tissue are you guys. But the question is, so I started thinking, what is it that's different? Why is it that we trust, you know, a cardiologist? What is it that separates a cardiologist from the standpoint of a medical standpoint, from a medical legal standpoint? Why would an attorney trust a cardiologist's position on any case? And this isn't relevant as far as soft tissue, but the point is that they do listen to a cardiologist. Why? Because they actually have an EKG. They have a machine that they can rely on. It's not just their opinion. They're using data to make decisions. Look at a brain surgeon as an example. Would you want to, or would you trust a surgeon that wanted to do surgery based on intuition without a CT scan? Well, the reason that we end up saying, okay, well, we're going to go forward with this is they actually have a CT scan. And so this is the hole that we need to fill. This is the key element we need to fill in terms of meeting that need for credibility, is we need our own tools for soft tissue injury. When it comes to auto mechanics, we've even reached the point, I'm a race car driver. I took my truck in for an alignment, and I couldn't believe it. The mechanic showed the pre-adjustment imagery here of the actual wheels, the pre-adjustment alignment, and then post-adjustment. But the key here is, do you think that I decided that it made sense to treat my vehicle, to actually have it fixed once I saw this data? This has got the same power in our arena. If we have data like this, we can have, and I love the fact that they use the same terminology. But the key is, of course, I said, let's go forward with this. So not only does it get the patient engaged, it gets the attorney engaged and everybody else, because if you can show jury, judge, everyone that you have data establishing that there's a problem and then show progress over time, you've got tremendous support. And as you know, this has to do with warranty claims. If you have a vehicle like a BMW, for example, and you have a warranty claim, which is like having health insurance, you take the vehicle in. If they don't get a code off the vehicle, the warranty will not pay for the work that needs to be done. So this is an important thing. This analogy applies to us. If we have data to support our position, we're going to have insurers pay us, and pay us significantly more than they would otherwise, giving you control over how long you see that patient and what you decide to do treatment as far as treatment protocol. But what do all these tests have in common? Every one of them passed the duct tape test. That's the key. The EKG, the device you plug into the car, the CT, the patient response is irrelevant. And what we've done in general in the past is we've actually just listened to patient response, and we've said to insurers, but they told us that they have a problem, and we felt it with our fingers. This is what's different, is that we want to have a tool that meets this duct tape test, because that's what makes it indisputable. That's the most important thing. As the clear experts on soft tissue injury, all we need is to provide that evidence, because the world is evidence-based at this point, and we need the data to prove it, to establish the truth, to make it clear that it's not your story versus theirs, that it's actually a truth, which we know, and it's based on data. The question is, could the DynaROM, the motion EMG that you now see established in the AMA's book on range of motion as the gold standard, could it meet this niche? Could it meet this requirement for us to own this niche? Is this the tool that actually matches that or equals the cardiologist EKG or the CT for the surgeon? The answer is most likely yes. It actually does exactly. It's established as a tool that can prove soft tissue injury. And now let's ask the question, how does it work and why does it work so well? Well, you know, one of the first things that comes up is people say, oh, it's Surface EMG, oh, it's, you know, nonsense. Well, they're thinking about the 90s. They haven't realized how much things have changed. The number of research studies is insane at this point on Surface EMG. But the answer to the question is based purely on EKG technology, which has been around forever. The MyoVision measures those tiny electrical impulses generated when the muscles contract. We're looking at a summation of all the depolarizations. More sensitive than an EKG because of the fact that we're measuring millions of volt signals, but using the same technology. It's essentially a voltmeter, which looks at the muscle guarding and muscular response to injury. So that's what makes it unique, is that it's a voltmeter that establishes objectively the actual value of how much muscle guarding there is. And that is what makes it so unique. Why do most attorneys and insurers respond negatively to Surface EMG? Well, this is a funny one. This is where image and reality are so completely different. What they're doing essentially is they're hoping, and this is in every court case, every deposition, I've got them stored. You can email me and I can send you all the depositions. You can read them all. They're all exactly the same. They want you to believe that there is only one tool known as Surface EMG. And that is the static EMG, which is this measurement here. I'm not going to knock this. This is a very valuable tool. I can guarantee you that there will be a CPT code for it relatively soon. Right now, though, this is like the knife. This is like the gun. What we're doing here differently is this is measuring muscle activity while you're in a standing neutral posture. We're graphing range of motion and muscle activity simultaneously over here. Left is left lumbar, red is right lumbar, and we're graphing as the patient moves. It's a whole different kind of measure, but if they can keep you believing that this is the only test, then we've lost the credibility argument because there's not as many studies on this. So for static EMG, we actually are doing the test while the person's in a neutral posture, and we touch down the electrodes and measure muscle activity as the patient is in that neutral posture. It generates this graphic image you can see here. And it's, at minimum, I call it electronic form of palpation. So when I run into neurologists that question the value of it, I'll point out that it's at minimum electronic form of palpation. Would you want to see palpation that, is it acceptable to palpate? They say, of course it is. And would you like to see an electronic form of palpation that's actually got inter-examiner reliability? Absolutely. Well, guess what? Here we have it, the static EMG. And by adding the CP stress score, we've added a tremendous amount to this because it's such a significantly better way to actually measure with a single number the level of muscle tension over time. Just so you know, the single number is a summation of all these EMG readings, the Surface EMG readings about the spine. Think of it as a blood pressure cuff for spinal health. Again, by looking at this is looking at a pre and post adjustment. You can see this change from 253 microvolts to 108 microvolts is a change, pretty significant. Great way to track progress over time. And these readings themselves, we were able to interpret them very easily. Think of it as that powerful tool for patient education because it keeps the patient focused on function instead of symptoms. I'm not going to knock it. All the experts are starting to recognize that this is valuable. The reason it was an issue in the past was, to be honest, the machines that existed in the old days just simply did not work. They were measuring electrical interference or noise. They were not reproducible. The MyoVision is so good. You can do 2 tests in a row. If you look at the EP stress score, you'll see that the data is going to be within 10% to 15% of each other if you follow proper protocol. So it is extremely reproducible. It's a new generation of tool for this. Now, doing in motion EMG, or measuring muscle activity as the patient moves, as they're bending into flexion, we're actually we're having a technical issue. Look at this. Don't know why, but anyways, what's happening here is that we graph muscle activity at the bottom, sorry, at the top, with range of motion at the top. And so we're able to look at the range of motion, sorry, at the bottom, with muscle activity at the top as the patient moves. And the result of this is that we're able to graph, here's a normal and an abnormal. We're able to graph the muscular response as they bend into flexion. Now this is done for all different other motions too. I'm just showing the simplest one, the flexion. We can graph the range of motion and see the quality of motion as they move along with their muscular response. If the muscles shut off when they're bending forward, there's no guarding. If the muscles fire like crazy, there is guarding. And it does work significantly better than endpoint range of motion, and it does pay 5 times more. That's the other thing, is that it's the Surface EMG pays significantly more, and you're doing it in the same time as doing range of motion with the addition of adding the electrodes. Think of the static EMGs as spinal EKG, and the DynaROM is our EKG stress test. So that's kind of what these two are if you want to compare them. The big paradigm shift that's occurred, and this is happening all over the country at this point, as everyone's recognized this, we've used as our standard endpoint range of motion. Very, very clever trick on the part of insurers, because when we send in those endpoint range of motions, the percentage, which we're now at around 40 to 50% of patients that have completely normal range of motion, but you know that there's muscle guarding, you know that they're in pain, it's astronomical. So what ends up happening is it gets used against you. Guess what? Your range of motion is normal, and so no longer need to see the patient. Well, what happens when you take this is an example that led to a significant settlement, the largest settlement that this particular chiropractor has ever seen in his entire career. The endpoint range of motion done by the AME showed that the readings were normal in flexion, and we did the same test on the patient using the DynaROM. Now, the chiropractor did this. This was the IME. He's a medical doctor. And when we got the same range of motion, it was normal. But we had muscle guarding. And muscle guarding in the AMA guides is equal to 5 to 8% impairment, which led to a large settlement in this case. This would have been a loss, 100% loss. It was led, when you added the EMG portion to it, it's the lie detector part of the test is what established the injury. And here it is, the AMA guides recognize 5 to 8% impairment for muscle guarding. And they're not even doing it, they're not even defining it as an objective measurement like we are. We have indisputable proof. Now the interpretation has gotten so simplified now. Part of what I did in the software was add these little pictures showing the body's position. It made it easy for everyone from attorneys to patients to juries understand this and get it instantly. It's amazing to see the shift that's occurred for this. So here's a normal, muscles shut off in full flexion. Acute, they're in in a lot of pain. Muscles fire a lot in full flexion, even though the range of motion may be normal. And the moderate or the chronic is where we see the muscles are in the middle. So if you look at these three, you can see clearly shut off, firing like crazy. Muscles are halfway between this over here and the acute. That's our moderate or chronic. That's for our flexions. When we do lateral flexions and rotations, it's very simple. We've got the normal, where this is a left lateral flexion as an example. This is our range of motion graphed here. This is our left lumbar spine. This is our right lumbar spine in red. If there's a big difference between left and right sides, it means that the other side is not being recruited to guard. That's defined as lack of guarding. This is actually a normal response. When both sides fire, that is the body's natural response to injury and pain is guarding, correct? Well, guess what? We're documenting that guarding. You can see as they bend into the left again, both sides fire the same. That means the right side's jumping and saying, hey, I don't want you moving. This hurts. That's our severe or our acute. The moderate chronic is one where it's in the middle again, where there's some space between left and right sides, but not like a normal. These are all you have to know to generate the report, and now the new software actually does generate the report.
Hey, Dave?
Yeah.
There's a hand up, so let me just unmute the doctor that has a question.
Sure.
Doctor, go ahead and ask your question. Doctor, can you ask your question?
Or type it.
Yeah, he had his hand up. You can go ahead and, I'm not sure if you don't have your microphone on, but if you want to go ahead and type in a question, then I will get to it and interrupt Dave when I see that question pop up. Okay, Dave, you can go ahead.
Okay, and so yeah, make sure to type that out. We'd love to answer all your questions. So the old paradigm has been the IME versus you. This is what's been happening in every single case. The insurer gets to use the rubber stamp of their IME versus you, and it's been an issue because they typically will use. There's some DCs doing it, but there's MDs, and they're the non. Can you mute yourself? They're the non-IME. I mean, the IME is the non. They call them, non-independent, definitely not independent medical examiner. The new paradigm, this is what's changed. This has to do with the way our brain works, is the evidence-based paradigm in a data-driven, visually oriented world. And the reason that it's this way is if you look at individuals, when we can show them and explain to them something, 65% of us are going to get it. 10% learn by listening, 35% by seeing, 65% when you combine the two. And that's what leads to the power of this. That's what gives us the power to actually control this arena and shut down the IME. Matter of fact, I'd recommend you take the MyoVision test, send it to the IME when the patient's going to get an IME so they can actually see when there's positive findings in it, what is that person going to do? Put their license on the line and say there's a test with positive findings I'm going to ignore? So that's one of the reasons that we want to do this. So that visual data versus opinion, it levels the playing field. And so now they can take all the people they want to on this side and all the experts, and we have all the cases to support this, and they can put all the people they want to, and you still outweigh them. You're always going to outweigh them because you have evidence, and the world is data-driven, juries are data-driven, and they can blah, blah, blah all they want. When you show data proving your position, they're stuck.
Dave? Hey, Dave?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you to back up to the lateral bends because the doctor's question was on, is that left or right lateral flexion? So if you can just describe that. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you too is in the flexion, you may want to review what the difference is between chronic and acute as well in terms of the fasciculations.
Let's start with that. So when you bend into flexion, muscles shut off. It's called the flexion relaxation response. That's this part here. When you bend into flexion and muscles do not shut off, studies have shown that this is a reflex for the muscles to shut off. They're not shutting off. That means there's pain. And when you see here is that when they're bent into full flexion, there's several things you look at, but basically the actual level itself is all that matters. Yes, you can see how it's bouncing around. These details are things that are relevant, but I'm trying to avoid them to keep it simple for the patient and for the attorneys. I just look at the actual level, but the bouncing around you see here is fasciculation. That's what you see when they're acute. With the chronic state, there's a couple things you look at. One of them is that this is their muscle activity. Remember, this is range of motion down here. When they're bending forward in the chronic state, you can see that the muscles do want to drop. Here they go up to bend forward. This is this hump here. They stay high. If anything, they might even go a little bit higher in full flexion. And then they return back to the baseline here in neutral. But in the chronic situation, first of all, there's no fasciculation. You can see how it's nice and smooth. But there is this bump, the same as here. The readings do drop, unlike the acute, but they drop down not as low as the normal. That's what makes this a chronic or a moderate. And then the muscles fire to bring them back to neutral. In lateral flexion, this is the blue line is the left lumbar spine. Make sure I'm answering your question. If you want to ask more detail, please do. But the key here is it doesn't make any difference. It used to be a concern which side fired. There's a thing called paradoxical activity where some people actually, the right side fires when they do a left lateral flexion, believe it or not. So what we noticed and started recognizing out of the literature and clinical work is that it doesn't matter which side's firing. What matters is there's no firing recruitment from the opposite side. That recruitment from the opposite side is our clear indicator of a guarding state. So when you see no guarding from the opposite side, no firing, that means the lack of guarding. In the severe case, you see how left and right sides fire together. And again, this is contrary to what was taught years ago, but the new view on this is that both sides fire together is a guarding state. Something in the middle where there isn't this huge gap between them. All you have to look is this white space. The more white space, the better. And you can see in our chronic or moderate that they fire, but there's a separation. It's just that it's not a huge separation. So does that answer the question?
Hang on one second, Dave. Let me see if that answered the question. Hey, doctor that asked the question, I have you unmuted now. If you want to ask it verbally, you can. No, okay. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like that answered. If he comes up with another question, I'll just interrupt you again.
Okay. Yeah, it's that's the key is to keep it simple. That's the key to this whole thing is keeping it simple. And this is what we use now. You just pull your software up on your computer. You're not going to see. We've taken on every insurance, every challenge so far. They even tried to start again recently, and we beat them in 2 more depositions, so they kind of stopped again. You probably won't ever have to be deposed, but if you do, your software pulls this up on the screen. This is what you'd show. You don't even need, in the modern courtroom, in the modern case deposition, you use your computer, and the software does this on its own automatically. It's built right into the software. Now, this is something that's really serious, and this has been the big issue. This is what chiropractors have had to overcome is, and what I've dealt with directly. Instead of pretending it's not real, I've wanted to deal with this directly. The Gallup poll showed that medical doctors, this is where this issue comes in why attorneys are more comfortable working with them, or why, in the past anyways, and why it is that they have more credibility in the courtroom, is medical doctors have a higher rating as far as the Gallup poll goes, 70 versus 38 for chiropractors. And the reason is simply the big difference between all these ones that have a higher rating is they all have data to support their positions. Now, so we have to do the same thing, and that's all we have to do to move ourselves up and go above them. And as I said, I designed this tool to level the playing field, and what ended up happening was we ended up dominating in this arena. Every one of the court cases we've ended up dominating. The arguments made by insurers attacking validity of Surface EMG, they're on a continuous basis just made up. There's been no supporting, literally not a single case where they've been successful at establishing the lack of validity of this tool. Now, this is the main most commonly used claim about the validity of Surface EMG, questioning the validity of it. And it comes from a paper called the Technology Review paper, which is published by the American Academy of, or Association of Electrodiagnostic Medicine. In the first paragraph, now the number of attorneys and doctors that have called me and said, I don't know what to do, they've sent this paper and it's over, we're never going to win this. The AAEM says there's no validity to it. Well, the first paragraph says, talks about Surface EMG as far as the diagnosis of nerve and muscle disorders. And they're defining it as neuropathies, all these different neuropathies, neuromuscular junction disorders, etc. That's talking about the needle EMG. Right away on the right side, on the first page, it says this review does not comment the use of Surface EMG in diagnosis of central nervous system disorders, problems of coordination, but the key one here is pain as an entity independent of nerve damage. All this paper says is you cannot use Surface EMG to evaluate for nerve damage. You need needle EMG. Well, guess what? You can't use Surface EMG to evaluate for thyroid disorder either. We're not trying to. We're using it to establish soft tissue injury and use it to track progress. So it does meet these requirements of this paper itself. I use this paper to support the use of it. And so this is the only thing they've ever come up with. And again, the more grandiose the misrepresentation, the more likely you'll buy it. And that's what they're hoping. There is no support. But here's the best part. They're saying that there's only needle EMG studies. That is all that exists. And all you have to do is learn how to use PubMed. Go to pubmed.gov, do a search on Surface and electromyography. 8,000, now there's 8,600 as of yesterday. I had to do this again for another case. 8,267 as of about 2 months ago. 8,267, they claim there's none. Makes it very easy to establish the validity. Needle EMG is the only EMG? Well, we are even lucky enough to have a paper where they actually went in and said, let's look at the two, needle and surface. Now, again, we don't want to ever use those two words in the same sentence. They're used to measure completely different phenomena. But in this particular limited use, where they did flexions. That you can see the needle EMGs here, the surface EMGs here. If you follow the outline of this, you'll see it matches exactly in a normal and an abnormal injury, the needle. But they found there was more valuable information found in the surface, the needle, for evaluating for back pain itself. And the other part was the reproducibility was extremely high. In the current guidelines currently in the ODG, they've actually removed all the attacks on surface EMG over the last year. This is the most recent one. What's interesting is the only papers they reference here, this I won the 2004 one against Blue Cross. I won this. This person changed their position in 1995 completely. This one changed their position in 2005 completely. There is no validity to these statements, but again, all they're talking about here is static EMG and needle EMG. How you can't use it for. That's all it says. Here you can see Haig in 1996. Not supporting the use of surface EMG. This is the 2005 paper where he is supporting the use of it. So very easy to beat them on these. Here's reproducibility, 0.92 inflection. Can't really beat that, published. The other thing that's happened is they all attack the MyoVision specifically. There's probably 25 or 30 research papers published using the MyoVision. Palmer just sent in their request for our information for publication. They're actually producing right now using the MyoVision. They've already filed all the paperwork. They're submitted it, and apparently it's been approved. So another published study is coming out this year on surface EMG using the MyoVision. But this gives you incredible. This ends this discussion in every deposition that you use this paper showing that the MyoVision was selected for this research paper because this covers all bases. This is a control group study where they found significant differences between normals and abnormals, both in static and dynamic EMG, but the key is they use the MyoVision. It gives it instant credibility in the courtroom. This paper established why you need to use DynaROM and not endpoint range of motion, because it increased the sensitivity and specificity by using dynamic EMG and range of motion. You got much better results. Now the CPT code establishes the validity of it also, because the AMA has to recognize it to have a code. It has to be a valid tool. Again, it pays 5 times more than range of motion. 96002 is the test. 96004 is the report. Is it recognized by other healthcare providers? This is something I give to every attorney in every deposition. I hand them this book, show it to them, and that's it. They pick this up in every deposition, show it to the other side when they ask, well, what, is this ever recognized by the AMA? You just show them the AMA's book with the MyoVision in it. I have to laugh because I was attacked for this for years ago when this actually happened about 6 years ago apparently, but saying that why would I work with it? Well, I didn't choose this. You have to be happy as chiropractors. The AMA, we've been looking for support from everyone in the other healthcare professions forever. Finally, the AMA recognizes the best tool to use for injury evaluation is a chiropractic tool, the MyoVision. We should be happy about that. I was amazed how many people thought this was a bad idea. Now it establishes your credibility instantly in the courtroom, making you equal to every MD they bring at you. The FDA, does it recognize it? Well, the MyoVision is recognized as a diagnostic device. It's the highest level, class 2, you can actually get for any device, and that removes that as an issue. So I'm just sealing these all up. What about admissibility? 300 insurance companies, 75 attorneys in the state of Florida went from the lower court decision to Superior Court, we won, to the Supreme Court, which rejected the appeal. There's a statute in Florida requiring payment for this. This has affected all the other states in the country because no judge is going to want to go through this year-long process of reviewing every research paper, and they use this. It's been submitted in many different cases and accepted as proof of admissibility in the courtroom. And it's even approved as a diagnostic device in Washington State. This came up in a court case recently where it ended the IME's argument when it was shown as an approved diagnostic device. What's cool about this is that try to imagine that you're a principled subluxation-based chiropractor, and you're going to go to court. In the past, it was you using talking about subluxation and the philosophy of chiropractic in the courtroom. And unfortunately, the jury, even though we have passion behind us, the jury doesn't understand what we're talking about. They just don't understand this, but they do understand data. And in this case, which is great proof of this, a subluxation-based DC went into the courtroom armed with his MyoVision DynaROM data, and won the case against a very solid, very, very experienced IME. And this is the first of its kind, and it established again that they thought they could beat this guy because he was going to talk about philosophy in the courtroom. And guess what? That's not at all what happened. He talked about the data, the jury got it, and we won. This is exactly what the jury got a chance to see was, and this is an example, this isn't exactly in this case, but they saw this on a big poster board and this next to it, and the jury's like, this one's injured, this one's not. You win. I don't care what the IME says. It's that simple. Because all he had was his opinion. The other thing is that MRI fails a huge percent of the time in these soft tissue cases. MRI doesn't help at all. This was brought up by the attorneys that are sponsoring my class. They've said, you know, we've sent people off to MDs and spent $750 on their opinion, which means nothing. It hasn't helped. The MRI hasn't really helped. Ligament laxity can be very valuable, as can MRI, but there are cases where, and I'm one of them, where I was in a crash at 150 miles an hour, and you can imagine the ligament laxity that occurred in my spine. But the test showed nothing, and the reason was that I had so much guarding. This is a year and a half later, so much guarding that I couldn't get enough motion to establish the laxity. So when these tests, which are great, when they provide nothing, the DynaROM is going to be accurate, and it's always going to match the oswestry, the patient's complaint. That's been established. This was the last deposition I had. This is, 3 weeks ago. This was the attorney, never seen it before until deposition. It was a pleasure to meet you today, learn about the MyoVision black box. I predict as the word spreads, this will be the key to helping soft tissue plaintiffs all over the country get the compensation they deserve. Honestly, he saw what this did, and he saw how there was absolutely no response from the other side. We have indisputable evidence. This is what you need, like the cardiologist EKG. You need the same thing. You need to have this data, and that's what this provides. The next question, this has gone as far as having the Bar Association's group on PI have me speak to the whole group. All the attorneys now are, who can I send them to? Matter of fact, if you call this law firm in the state, you can ask, should I get a MyoVision? They recommend that you do, and they're not allowed to do this because if there was money transferring hands, the point is that they are doing it for ethical reasons. They know that it's valuable for these cases, and that's why this is happening. So we've also created and have a great brochure for attorneys. If you email either Mark or myself, I can send you back the brochure. And you can, it actually is for attorneys specifically, and it answers all their questions. But one of the best byproducts of this whole process is the patient. The percentage of patients that are with soft tissue injury, they have no broken bone, nothing to show, that have friends, family, even the attorney that are wondering, are they really in that much pain? Well, the number of patients that have called me crying, and I've thanked the doctors for this. I've got video of all these doctors saying the same thing. Because of the fact they've got this piece of paper, this printout, they have this objective data from a machine which shows that they really are in pain, it reduces their emotional stress so dramatically, which helps them heal, helps them get better, and overall their quality of life goes up. One of the best byproducts of utilizing technology, both static and dynamic, is for the patient's mental health. Davinci said there's simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's what I focused on. The wireless tools are so simple to use. You attach electrodes, you perform range of motion at the same time, and you're not limited by the actual wires themselves. It makes it very easy to perform the test. Yes, you have lead wires, but that's all. And the software, I've made it now so that you can actually put the ideal next to the patient and see them side by side. You can even put next to the patient their previous test can sit up here so you can see, and you can move through all the ranges of motion, and you compare, like here's an example, a person's a normal, they bend forward in flexion, here's a person who's abnormal, you can see their muscle activity is firing like crazy. Attorneys love this, and you can show this in deposition, and you just simply open up the ideal and you're all set. The new report's great because it outputs all the information, including the patient information, into what's really cool is a Word doc. It's a Word document with drop-downs. You simply select what you saw on the screen, and you're done with the entire interpretation in 5 minutes. And the average doc's saying they're getting paid about, for the whole test with the report, about $250 a test. and it takes 5 minutes to do. It includes now the flexion or the range of motion AMA values versus the patient. And the key here is that I want you to all join in with the rest of your colleagues. I want you to integrate modern technology and own this niche, but you need the technology to do it. The MyoVision DynaROM is that technology, and it's indisputable. It is the solution to that problem, and it brings you up to the same level as everyone else, and it also is what patients are expecting these days. They want to see data, and you need to be able to provide that for them, and data they can use to support their position. Now, when I said the thing about would you spend $5,000, the EDA does provide a tax credit for this, and a tax credit's not a write-off. It's actual cash. So up to $10,000, you'd actually receive half of that back. And so in other words, if your taxes were $20,000, or let's say they were $10,000 for last year, you'd receive $5,000 reduction. So it's like the equivalent of cash in your taxes. So at the end of the year, you end up getting that back. And so that makes it so that the actual cost is about $5,500 for the machine. And that's really just one PI case is all you need to pay for the whole machine. And as far as reimbursement at $250 a test, you can imagine a lease at $2 something a month makes it very easy to make this easily covered by that. One thing I want to add to, this is a really interesting conversation that I had today with a billing service. Now you guys are going to love this. A billing service telling me, yeah, you can get paid on it, but I recommend that every doctor have this whether they get paid on it or not, even though they do, because he said that, and he does the billing, and he gets money, a percentage off this, and he's saying, I don't care, this is the billing guy, he's saying, I don't care whether it pays or not, because I see that every practice that uses this has such a higher dollar value per patient that it's worth, I'm recommending it just for that purpose alone, which I was shocked by. I thought the billing guy would want to know that it was paid for. He was like, I could care less. I see that their patients are staying 10 visits longer than they would, 15 visits longer because they have the data. So that's another thing to point out is that this is an essential tool for keeping everybody focused on their care, and chiropractic care specifically.